Our next speaker is Patri Friedman. He certainly has a fabulous lineage. I guess his grandpa is the most famous. That Mr. Friedman, the economist, and his dad is a libertarian law professor. And I guess it's by those antecedents that Patri has come by his particular project. It's a fascinating thing. It's called Seasteading. And Patri, why don't you pick up the story?
So I'm here to share my excitement about building startup countries on the ocean. Hey, this is Idea City. We can think big. So we'll start with a puzzle. We see most technologies change over the course of years or decades, right? To look back through old magazines is just to laugh at how ridiculous things are, right? Compare that to an iPod. Ooh, it tapes tapes. And even the iPod's gotten a lot better over the course of 10 years. But some technologies haven't advanced so fast. We're still using government technology rooted in 2,000 years ago, representative democracy. I mean, if we were using the audio technology of 2,000 years ago, it wouldn't be so good. And at least Canada has updated their constitution recently. But the United States is still using a constitution written over 200 years ago. If you drove a car from 200 years ago, it would be a horse. That's not much progress. So that's our starting puzzle. Why is there such rapid innovation in some fields, like audio technology or transportation, but things seem to move a lot slower when it comes to government? So to figure out why, we have to understand, where does progress come from? Progress usually means that things are getting better. And to find better things, we usually experiment and find new things. And the place where we find these new, better things is by trying lots of different things and seeing what sticks, by trial and error. This is how we get progress in science, through experiments. And it's how we get progress in business and technology. Every startup is a kind of experiment, often an experiment with a new technology. Most of them fail, but those few that succeed, like my last employer, change the world. Speaking of the world, life itself came from this same process of trial and error experiments. Right? Every life form that ever lived was an experiment of its unique genetic makeup. And 1 billion years of these experiments produced us, produced humanity. So I'm trying to illustrate is that this idea of progress through many experiments over time, this is not a small idea. This is not a new idea. This is evolution. What's innovative is going to be applying it to government. So let's put on our entrepreneur hats and let's think about the global government industry. Let's think about governance as a service. It's provided by retailers, countries, to customers, citizens. And since it's an industry, we can look at it through the lens of economics. Now, this is not to deny the moral dimension of politics, just to set it aside for now. I find if you talk about morality, it's like you push the bullshit button in people's brains. You know, everybody turns into Bill O'Reilly and starts screaming at each other. Let's not do that. We'll just take a deep breath and think about this industry. For example, maybe it has little progress because it's a little industry. Actually, not the case. Government is the biggest industry in the world. It's about 30% of global GDP. And because it's the biggest industry, it really, really matters how good the quality is and how much innovation it has. So let's hope that it actually, performs pretty well. Ooh, not so much. Actually, this industry is legendary for poor customer satisfaction and racking up huge debts, right? The largest firm lost $1.3 trillion last year. That's with a T. Even you guys lost $50 billion. It's a lot of red ink. And those are top firms. It gets much worse. This industry is so bad that the worst firms actually kill their own customers. So something's pretty screwed up here. So one question is, why does the quality vary so much? We just heard some personal stories of Korea. Now here's a big picture statistical one. Economists used to think that differences between countries were driven by things like capital and resources. But now they believe it's more about intangibles, like rules and systems of government. And Korea is an interesting historical example. By historical accident, it was partitioned into 2 regions that were forced to adopt very different government technologies. And as you can see in this picture of the peninsula at night, with the same people and the same resources, we had incredibly different results. So rules matter. Now, some people think that the reason we don't get progress in government is because there's nothing better, because everything's been tried and there's no better system possible. I call that a failure of the imagination. I mean, we're constantly learning from many fields of science, like the insights you've heard here, new ways of doing things, and inventing technology that makes new things possible. Surely these advances over the years, the decades, and the centuries are unlocking completely new forms of government that our country's founders could never have imagined. Let me just pick two out of the infinite possibilities. The first is dynamic democracy. This takes representative democracy to the next level. Right now, we vote every few years for representatives based on geographic regions who represent us on everything. And there's a lot of problems with this. Why not be able to give your vote to whoever you want, whenever you want, on any issue, and be represented by somebody who's an expert on that topic? I think this would be a great improvement, and it was impossible a few decades ago, before the internet. Now, it would be easy. As a very different idea, consider Apple Nation, the country that knows what you want even better than you do. Steve Jobs occupies his retirement by furrowing his brow, consulting his designers, and coming up with a shiny new system of government to revolutionize another industry. You learn the rules before you join. Every year you decide whether to renew your Apple Nation membership or leave. Now, some people have a reaction against this system. They say, but I wouldn't have voice. I think this is because we evolved in these small tribes that were governed by small group consensus. So we assume that for politics to work, we have to have a voice. But the larger the group, the less well voice works, both literally, you can't be heard, and when it comes to political analysis. What works in large modern societies is not voice, but choice. Being able to choose many different products from many different providers who are all trying to meet your needs. After all, unless you're a major shareholder, you don't get much voice in Tim Hortons. But they do a great job because you can always leave and go get your coffee someplace else. Whereas in East Berlin, where citizens did not have the choice to exit, they got terrible service because it was a monopoly. So now we have the pieces to solve this puzzle of why the government industry doesn't have that much progress, why we don't have dynamic democracy and Apple Nation happening. It's because there's no place for these experiments. You can make small experiments with existing countries, you can tweak them a little bit, but you can't try the radically new things that bring us the huge advances. There's no place for it. There's no way for an entrepreneur to just do a startup country. In order to enter the software industry, all you need is a laptop. And so we see tons of software companies. But to enter the government industry, you need a physical place which will grant you political autonomy. But there is no such place. Every piece of land in the world is claimed and defended. And so there's no place that entrepreneurs can go and try out new things. There's no channel for this peaceful trial and error experiments that drives progress. No wonder there's no innovation. Now, for humanity, this is a huge problem. From my Silicon Valley perspective, it's a business opportunity. I mean, what I've just described is an industry that's ripe for disruption by new competitors. Maybe a startup country could be the first trillion-dollar business. Maybe if we lower this barrier to entry so that lots of entrepreneurs can try to make lots of new countries, we can have a dynamic startup sector for government. Lots of different companies trying different forms of government at different sizes, meeting people's needs in different ways, and constantly evolving and co-evolving with technology. This actually happened in the past, in this brief fertile period in ancient Athens, where over 100 city-states competed for each other's citizens, copied each other's laws, and remixed them. And from this brief period of experimentation came many of the ideas we use today. Representative democracy, leagues for defense like NATO, uniform systems of money, weight, and measurement that cross national borders that we're still benefiting from. Most of us, at least. My country hasn't caught on to the uniform weights and measurements yet. So this is how we come to seasteading, to homesteading the high seas, because we need a place for these political experiments. And the best place is the frontier. The frontier, because it's empty, because people choose to go there and it doesn't have existing systems, people used to doing things a certain way, is the best place for startup countries. And the next frontier for humanity is the ocean. But there's more. The ocean is not just the next frontier. It's actually physically different. It's a fluid medium which enables a different type of society. Cruise ships are as large as skyscrapers, yet they move around all the time because of the fluid nature of the ocean, which means that these floating cities will be physically rearrangeable in a way that's impossible on land. Not only can they copy each other's laws and innovations and remix them, but they can combine territory, or aquatory. They can split. They can grow by taking pieces from other floating cities. It's truly a dynamic environment on the ocean, and it will lead naturally to these more experimental societies. And this is not a utopian idea. Notice that I haven't said anything, except a couple examples, about exactly what type of system we should use. It's not that I know what political system everyone should use. I mean, I have some ideas. I'm sure we all do. But I don't know if they'll work. And even if they worked as best as they could, I don't think they'd be right for everyone. The idea here is to empower every group of people with a vision for a better society to go build it. Instead of arguing in theory about what works best, let's try to let 1,000 nations bloom in practice. And then instead of politics being about arguing and debate about one size fits all, we can go shopping. We can go shopping for countries like you shop for a house in a neighborhood today. I've actually found this perspective on politics just incredibly lowering for my stress. Things are no longer a titanic moral struggle between good and evil. We can all just get along. If we disagree about political means, about what the best laws are, we're just disagreeing about how we think the world works. And when adults have different theories, they don't need to yell or argue. They can go do experiments and let reality decide. Now, what if we disagree about political ends, about what type of society is most desirable? If we're trapped together in one or a few countries, then your win is my loss. We're enemies. In the seasteading view, we're all just consumers frustrated by lack of choice. We'd all benefit from more competition, more government startups trying more new things. We can all be happy. So that was the big vision, but this is more than a vision. We're putting it into practice. Every day at the Seasteading Institute, we're trying to make this future a reality. Let me give you a quick run through what we're working on. One of the big challenges of seasteading is just that it's so big, right? Like everything has something to do with building a new country, every field of science. But we can't work on everything. They can't work on everything. We definitely can't. And so with these limited resources and a huge challenge, we have to focus ruthlessly on the few core challenges. Fortunately, most of the problems of living on the ocean are solved. Cruise ships basically are floating cities. They provide the basics of life: water, food, power, internet, barely, at a pretty reasonable cost. So the question is, what's missing? What's missing is political autonomy, engineering that can expand, business models besides just tourism, and a community of pioneers. This autonomy is absolutely crucial because the goal here is to be able to do political experiments, and that requires local autonomy. And it's hard because law is complex, international law is even more complex, and trying to do new things in international law, it's ridiculously complex. These are fields of law that are almost as vast and mysterious as the ocean, and it's hard to wrap your heads around. So we're trying to understand them so that we can figure out how much autonomy we can get now and craft strategies to increase this going forward. We've got a series of papers on this coming out this year. Engineering. We're going to start with modified cruise ships, but the long-term goal is to be settlers, not nomads. And so what we need are new engineering designs for platforms that are inexpensive, safe, and can combine modularly in a way that no oil platform today can, to grow from a building to a village to a city. We've designed one, a 200-guest hotel, designed for the waves off Southern California that was $300 a square foot. We have a bunch of other engineering papers and more research ongoing. Business models are absolutely key to our success. I mean, these seasteads are going to be expensive. We're going to need capital, and people who live there are going to need jobs. That's why we held a business plan contest called Sink or Swim. We have the Magellan Network of Entrepreneurs, and we're releasing a series of overview papers about doing business on seasteads. Our top business so far is medical tourism, where people go to other countries either for lower cost or less waiting time on medical care. I've actually personally experienced this. I spent 7 weeks last year in Hyderabad, India, to save $80,000 on a procedure that my insurance wouldn't cover. So I know it works. And don't get all Canadian on me, I checked, and it's not covered here either. Seasteads can bring these same benefits to just 12 miles offshore. Finally, we're working on building a community. The residents who will pioneer new ways of life on seasteads, the entrepreneurs who will create jobs, the donors and investors whose resources power our work, and perhaps most importantly, supporters around the world who understand that even if they never move to a seastead, they'll get better service if seasteading exists, because a startup sector for government means more competition, more new ideas, means things will eventually improve in the current large providers, existing countries. We spread the word to this community through press coverage, social media, talks like this one, and through more unusual events like Ephemerile, our annual gathering as a floating festival on the waters in California. I actually just got back from the third annual Ephemerile, which was last weekend. I'm still kind of recovering. It's our sort of Burning Man on the water. Here's our timeline. I founded the Seasteading Institute in 2008 with Peter Thiel, who was the founder and CEO of PayPal. You may also know him as the first investor in Facebook, who he was featured in the movie The Social Network for. We've been doing a few years of research and movement building. We expect to see the first seasteading businesses happen in the next year on small boats. In a few years, they'll move to larger vessels, and in 5 to 7 years, we expect to see the first of these newly designed engineering platforms, hosting a range of businesses. In about 10 years, we'll see the first villages for thousands of people and an even broader range of businesses. These villages are a very important milestone for me personally, because that's when my wife says that we can move our family to a seastead. Another 10 years from then, these villages, at least one of them, will have grown into a true floating city for hundreds of thousands of people. After that comes world domination. So our time together has been brief, but it's a big idea, and I'm in this for the long haul. If you're interested, I encourage you to go check out our website, sign up for one of our update channels. It's going to be a years, decades-long adventure. Thank you.
Patri, that's fascinating, as are your running shoes. I've read about those things. What are they called?
They're the Vibram 5 Fingers. I've got
Can we get a
5
shot
pairs.
of that? Can we get a shot of that? They look like second skin.
They're like foot gloves. They're awesome.
Yeah. And
by the way, I can help you live longer. Let's talk.
really?
Yeah.
Oh, why don't we let them in on it as well?
Sure. Well, there's something called intermittent fasting. It's where instead of restricting calories, you say don't eat very much every other day. Mm-hmm. And even if you eat so much in those in between, the up days, as to have the same number of calories, it actually has the same protective effects as calorie restriction. I gave a talk on this last year. So you only have to suffer every other day, and you can eat as much as you want in between.
Well, you know what? I actually do that spontaneously in the sense that... No, I mean, yeah, there are days when you just forget to eat, and I eat mostly for social reasons, really. No, seriously, I can forget about it for literally a day or 2 or 3, and sometimes have to be reminded if I'm really busy and into something.
Yeah.
Getting back to your presentation, in what way is seasteading different from a condo?
It's like a condo where you actually come up with a whole new system of government and new rules.
And that system of government is planted by the owner, or do you then...
It can be either. So that's up to each individual community. We imagine that some of them will form like a group of people who come together around one political system and come up with it. Others will be created by entrepreneurs, sort of like Singapore, where they say, okay, here's the system, we think it's great, if you like it, come here.
Well, then it's governments like Vegas hotels, in a way. I mean,
I like Vegas hotels.
Your illustrations reminded me of Vegas hotels. So I'll ask you one last question, which is, you gave me the impression that you're about to begin one of these yourself. So are you the autocrat, the potentate, the
CEO.
owner, CEO? And will this have a kind of collective farm quality, a moshav organization?
Hospital. We're looking at this medical tourism business very seriously. So basically a hospital ship where instead of flying to India or Thailand for a procedure that your insurance doesn't cover, get on a boat in San Diego or Florida, sail out 12 miles and get it.
No, that's cool. That's like going to an offshore casino, but that doesn't mean you're moving on board.
Right, so that's the short term, and we want to build up those businesses over the next 5 to 10 years so that we can actually put a community out there that'll be a real country.
Last question, and this time I mean it. There's this boat called the World, where you can buy a condo aboard and live aboard, and it's in perpetual sale around the globe, isn't it?
That's right.
How are the social dynamics aboard that boat? Have you studied those?
I visited it briefly when it was in San Francisco. It's interesting. Most of the people only spend 3 months a year there on average. And they're not trying to do anything very innovative in terms of governing systems. In fact, they're very explicit, like, this is not a different country, you can't use this as your official residential address, and so forth. So that's one issue. And another is just because they travel around the world all the time, the expenses are incredible. So you're paying 3 or 4 times as much per year for all those fuel costs and everything as you'd be paying for the mortgage payments on your condo. So we need to find ways of doing the same thing much more cheaply.
Well, I have one piece of advice for you. Make legal in your country what's illegal everywhere else. You'll be amazed what'll happen.
Sounds like a plan.